name's Colin Dixon. I'm founder and chief analyst at nScreenMedia. That's a free resource to you. There's news, opinion, and comment every single day. Please check it out at nScreenMedia.com. I am absolutely delighted to be here to speak with Rebekah Dopp. She is the principal news and local media at Global Partnerships. And as Rebekah and I were chatting about this session, we found ourselves being in violent agreement on many, many topics. I have to say that one of the things I do is I speak at a lot of conferences, and I speak internationally as well. And what I find is pretty much a common thread. That is that local TV is really struggling to maintain its voice with its audience. And that is the subject of our discussion today. So with that, I'm going to ask Rebekah. Rebekah, would you please just introduce yourself and tell us what you do?
Sure. Is this working? So I work at Google, and I work with local news partners, some specifically, but then also with a focus on broadcast TV in particular, to really help them understand the Google portfolio, what we can do to help make a difference for them as their business grows and evolves.
Very good. So You have. I'd like you to spend some time and talk about your background, because the real question I want to get to is, why did you go to Google, and why now? So answer that question. Why Google and why now?
Okay, so I started my career at HBO. I spent 14 years at HBO, first for a few years in the distribution side of the house, and then I moved over to the technology side of the house to run the business unit that eventually launched HBO Go, among other products. And so my specialty, my area of expertise is on the TV side, specifically in TV streaming. And it was such a wonderful time to learn those things.
When was that?
2000 to 2014. And it was such a wonderful time because no one else had really done what HBO was doing at the time. And so we made a ton of mistakes and learned a lot. And it was a really exciting time. And separately, right around 2014, CBS was just about to launch CBS All Access, and they needed someone who could speak the business of it, but had the technology and product background to really roll it out to all of the local television stations that CBS All Access was really trying to get on board. And they ended up getting 99% of their local affiliate stations on board. And so I had the pleasure to work at CBS during that really critical time with all of the local broadcasters, some hopefully are in the room. And it was, again, I was a part of the HBO Go launch team. I was a part of the CBS All Access launch team, and I just learned so much from that. And through that time at CBS, really became very close, very interested in all of the local TV news broadcasting partners.
I was very, very surprised at how quickly CBS was able to add all those local stations. Personally, I mean, we know what a mess things were in 2014 with regard to contracts and licensing and everything. That was an amazing achievement to get those local affiliates on board so quickly.
Well, I think, interestingly, CBS, unlike some of the other networks, CBS is not tethered to a very huge cable portfolio, right? And their mothership is actually the network programming and the network. And so their business objectives are very closely aligned to the local affiliates. And so they were better positioned at that time, and they were also the only network that didn't have a deal with Hulu. Right? And so they were able to go out to market with their own product, and it was a hugely successful launch. I'm really proud to be a part of it. My role at CBS was bifurcated, and so part of my role was working with all of those local TV broadcasters. The other part was negotiating with the new digital players like Google. And so when I was at CBS, I was negotiating with Google for YouTube TV. And as I sat across the table from Google, super excited to talk to them, and I said, great, okay, well, through me, you'll be able to get the 14 O&Os from CBS. What are you going to do about all the local CBS stations? And it was a surprise, I think, just from a rights perspective, from a business model perspective, because it was really incredibly important for YouTube TV as a differentiator to have all of the local stations on board. And so when I went on maternity leave with my youngest, Google called, and I mean, when Google calls, you take the call, and I was thrilled. I was so thrilled to move over to Google to help them get all the local broadcast stations to sign up to YouTube TV, which they did and rolled it out, and it still is a differentiator relative to all the other virtual MVPs.
Again, that was another big surprise. How did Google? How was YouTube TV able to do that so quickly, so efficiently?
Well, they hired me to do it, but really, and I mean that in jest. But the reality of it is, I come from that world, and so I speak the language. I understand local TV. I understand the incredibly complex business model that's changing. I understand the pressure cooker that rights issue is, and then that, frankly, leads into a lot of complexities when it comes to the technology stack that has to serve in that three-way integration. And so I speak that language, and it is important for Google is not successful in any area unless we have really strong partnerships, and we make our money when our partners succeed and make more money. And so it is critical for Google to make sure that we are partnering in a way, leading with empathy and leading with respect for our partners, and really bringing them to the table. So I'm proud to have been on the launch teams of HBO Go, CBS All Access, and YouTube TV.
I think a lot of people would like that resume. That's a pretty impressive resume. But, so YouTube TV brought you there.
Yes.
What's keeping you there? What's keeping you at Google?
So my role has changed significantly, and I've moved over to the Google side of the house under the Global Partnerships umbrella to work with all of these local partners across the Google portfolio. And specifically, what I'm really focused on right now is news and local news and how that's affecting, frankly, not only our democracy here, but worldwide. It's a global conversation that needs to happen. It needs to happen now. And just over a year ago, Google announced the Google News Initiative, which is a $300 million investment in news, and a big portion of that focuses on local news. And so I really think through and spend my days thinking through specific news in general, but also how can the local broadcasters, which, by the way, are the most engaged with news provider in the United States, they're also the most trusted, and in this time where journalism is under attack, just from a credibility perspective, it's really important that the local broadcasters have partners like Google who understand their business and really want to help them succeed and evolve their business models to help support the good journalism that currently exists.
And they really, well, I should be careful here and say they really need help. I'm not sure they recognize they need help right now.
It's a good question. The different types of platforms are in different stages, right? So I think it's pretty existential from a print perspective, and the print world understands it, saw what technology did to the music business, and TV did a good job of protecting itself from not going the way of music. But I think it's many local news providers have several different mediums, right? They have newspaper stations, they have radio stations, they have television stations. So I think it really depends on who you're talking to. If they have, as an example, some of these providers have newspapers in their portfolio or came from the newspaper business, and so it is much more top of mind to them because in the print world it is an existential conversation. The challenge here is not that they don't know. The challenge here is the television stations have a really strong cash flow, and their P&L looks very, very different than the print world. And so how can their thought, I believe, many of them is, how can we protect the mothership, what brought us to the dance, what is still very profitable, while leaning in and understanding more about how we're going to grow our business models and our revenues in different ways, in different places. And one of the ways that I really talk to my partners about is, rather than talking about being digital first or broadcast first or print first, we need to, as in the news world and the journalists, we need to be, the story is first. The story is the hub of the wheel, and then how we push that out to broadcast and to digital media in these different ways needs to change, and we need to be very thoughtful about it, because what we don't want to do is create tribalism where, as an example, and this happens in all businesses, in all industries, but print journalists don't always look at broadcast journalists and say, wow, you're doing a really great job. Just like, broadcast engineers don't always look at, digital engineers and say, wow, you guys are super duper smart. Like there are challenges associated with those people who aren't speaking the same language. And we need to be careful not to get wrapped up in that. We need to sort of work together and figure out how to maximize the strengths of each player.
So it sounds like, particularly with local news and local TV, that they view the threat or opportunity from online as kind of an existential threat. It's not really impacting their bottom line today, but it is. If they look out further, they must see that there is an issue, right?
I think they want to be a part of that evolution.
Right.
I think they want to be a part of that change, and in the world that I live in, I think that we can grow that pie and have it be accretive. And I believe that these particular partners are rightfully protective of their strong cash flow.
Yep, they're strong.
Rightfully. And I think they are also sophisticated and smart enough to want to partner in ways that is going to grow that for them while protecting the base.
So tell us, let's get specific. What is Google doing with that $300 million to help the local TV broadcasters?
So I'll give you an example, and this is actually not in the TV space, but it's something that I work on a lot, and so I'm pretty familiar with. Boston Globe in Boston is owned by the Henrys, who also own the Red Sox and Liverpool football team. And the reason I bring that up is to say that they are not tethered to, even though Boston Globe is an incredibly well-established news provider, they aren't tethered to sort of the old way of doing things, and they really do try to push the envelope and think outside of the box. And just recently it was announced that they have now more digital subscribers than they have print subscribers, which is really interesting for a newspaper that doesn't have a national footprint, that is very locally focused. So I am working with them on some tools that, and this is all through the Google News Initiative, some tools that will provide journalists with information at their fingertips that will enable them to cover the 2020 news election with more efficacy. So here's what that looks like. New Hampshire is right in Boston's backyard, and it's critical to the 2020 elections. And so everyone goes through New Hampshire very early on in the election cycle. And the Boston Globe journalists that are covering the 2020 elections would love to have at their fingertips what these candidates said 2 years ago about the same subject. Did the way that this candidate talked about this particular issue change depending on the constituency that they were talking to? How have they voted in city council, issues, like that sort of thing? And right now, they do pull up that information, but it's incredibly time-consuming. Huge research groups, and Google is helping them create tools to make it easier for the journalists to pull up this information in a very effective, time-sensitive way, and it's all validated with really credible sources. And so it's making their job much easier in this news cycle that used to be, in TV, the 6 o'clock news, you're racing to that, or in print, you're racing to that. Now, news cycle, everybody's racing in real time to scoop one another literally in real time. And so having those kinds of tools at the ready and at your fingertips is incredibly important. And so that is something that I'm working on with Boston Globe. It will absolutely translate across the board to other journalists and newsrooms, whether it's print, radio, TV.
That sounds like something that would be incredibly useful at that stage, at the primary stage, because, of course, the candidates are working to build their credibility too. I have a feeling they may end up loving and hating this.
The candidates.
Yes. So
correct. Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, think about it. Speech to text. Very quickly, right? Speech to text goes in, we can track it, we can have all that information. It's, one of the things that we have to be very careful about is ensuring that we're pulling the information from the most trusted sources, because if in any way, shape, or form, misinformation gets in there and it reduces the credibility of some of the tools that we're using, it's going to be a big problem. And so we really want to make sure that we're focused on the fidelity of the information that we have. But sure, I mean, if you're a candidate and you're saying one thing to one constituency and a different thing to a different constituency, that's going to be important. If you voted on something in a certain way consistently, and then all of a sudden your position has changed, that's a valid thing for a journalist to ask you about. And right now, we just don't have the tools to pull that information up in real time, or the journalists don't. And Google is helping them do that.
So that sounds like a fantastic tool for the journalists inside the TV stations to use. Boston Globe is one example of somebody that has embraced the idea. How about the others? I think sometimes Google and local media, there might be some sort of contentious issues going on because of, credibility and finding things independently, etc. How do those conversations go with other local broadcasters?
I have no idea what you're talking about. So, from my perspective, we have to add value, period. We have to add value to the partnership in order to build trust. That happens over time. There will never be a time, we're all, this is a for-profit world. We're in business. And so it is just simply pragmatic to make sure that you are coming to the table understanding your own personal, each company, goals and motivations, and also understanding the goals and motivations of others. But to go back to the Boston Globe and those tools, the aspiration and the goal and the plan is to create that tool set for the Boston Globe, but then make it readily available for all journalists everywhere. And that will help start to build these partnerships, establish more trust, and really work together. And oh, by the way, wouldn't that be wonderful to offer to the community at large, so that I can actually look up my city councilman's speeches and or voting record, and down to a very hyper-local level. And that is also part of the plan. And so, it's incredibly important to have these difficult conversations if our goals and objectives are not aligned, and find a really productive middle ground as we're talking through these things. But there's always an answer, but you have to start somewhere.
Right. Can I ask you to pull back to 30,000 feet for a second? You have such a broad background in local television and television in general, and now in new technology and new delivery distribution mechanisms. What do you think of some of the efforts that are going on in the industry, in the local TV industry today? So I'm thinking of things like Stir and things like Tegna, where they're doing Daily Blast Live and stuff. Are these things that others should be looking to replicate? Or what other things are you seeing that are working?
So right now we're in such nascent stages in terms of how, from a news perspective, how we are going to transition the business models to really enable journalists to do their job. The monetization models have changed significantly. The business models have changed significantly, and so I am really excited for all of the incubator projects that are coming up that each of these companies is really thinking about, because it shows that they are trying to put their dip their toe in the water, understand these pieces, and just like one of the things that I love about my HBO experience is we really didn't know what we were doing because it hadn't been done before, and so we made a ton of mistakes, but who cares, right? And so I love, both from a Google perspective, but then also all these other companies that are trying these new things, just try things out. Just see how it works, and I think what that also enables, you brought up Sinclair and Tegna in particular, they aren't dependent upon a partner to tell them how it works. They're figuring it out for themselves, and I think that makes them a stronger partner, and it's going to make their businesses stronger as a result.
Okay, so I have two final questions for you. First question, what gets you up in the morning?
Besides my 4 kids, yeah. I think we're at such an inflection point, not only, especially in our country. I live here, and so this is, it's incredibly important to me. But in our democracy, what we're talking about has such broad implications, and it's a very complex problem set, and it's going to require a very complex solution set to really get to a good place. But I'm really excited to see how we, as a community, and I mean the community at large in news, but then the broader democracy in the United States, really figures out how to address the 2020 elections. Yeah. And from a news perspective, it's really exciting because there are such great people out there doing great work, and we need to not take our eye off the ball for how incredibly important journalism is in general.
Yeah, I can tell you that's I share those concerns. That's the same conversations I have with people in Europe, in Scandinavia, all over the place. It's a very, very important issue. So, what keeps you up at night?
What keeps me up at night is related. It's how can we continue the dialogue and not have it be big tech against news? How can it be, print versus broadcast? Too often, I think we focus on the differences instead of the ways that we can actually work together and solve for some of these issues. And so figuring out how to lead with empathy, how to understand what are the driving factors of the person on the other end of the table. I mean, in this conversation, and I'm a deal guy, a lot of you in the room are probably deal guys as well, but if I'm talking about a super creative idea that's, I think is going to be so helpful to the person on the other side, and they're literally worried about whether their paycheck is going to come in next week, we're completely going to be missing each other. And it just doesn't matter. And so it's so incredibly important to meet everybody exactly where they are and figure out what is keeping them up at night and solve for those problems so that we can get to, more advanced conversations. And so it's really how can we come together with empathy and understanding as we're tackling all these really hard issues.
Great. Thank you. So I'm afraid we're out of time. I'm meant to hold some time for questions. Will you be sticking around for a few minutes so people can collar you? Great. I just want to mention that Adam Ware, who is with Stir Sinclair Stir, will be on my FAST panel, free ad-supported TV panel later today, so please stick around for that. That'll be very interesting. Rebekah, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on what we can do with local news.
TVOT